Somewhere around 650 CE, two Tang dynasty court astronomers wrote 60 illustrated prophecies that would be banned by 4 separate empires across 1,000 years of Chinese history. One Song emperor allegedly scrambled the panel order to destroy the text's authority, and instead created a puzzle no scholar has solved in 9 centuries. The text survives in multiple conflicting versions today, meaning no one alive can say with certainty what the original actually contained, and that methodological problem is the whole story. To understand why a prophetic diagram could frighten an emperor, you first need to understand what kind of text the Tui Bei Tu actually is and where it comes from. The full title translates roughly as the pushback diagram, the idea being that by pushing back against fate, you might read what is hidden ahead of you in time. The text attributed to it has 2 named authors, Chunfeng, a real and documented Tang court astronomer, and Yuan Tiangang, a real and documented Tang astrologer and physiognomist. Both men were genuine. Chunfeng helped compile the mathematical and astronomical texts that defined Tang scientific learning, and Yuan Tiangang's name appears in actual Tang biographical records. But whether they actually wrote the Tui Bei Tu together, or whether the text was written later and attributed to their famous names to give it authority, is a question historians cannot definitively answer. The earliest surviving manuscript copies date significantly later than 650 CE, and the text's provenance, its chain of custody from composition to first appearance, is broken. This matters enormously, because the entire question of whether any panel in the text predicted anything at all depends on when the text was actually written. A prophecy written after the event it describes is a historical document with poetic framing. It is not evidence of foresight, no matter how striking the language. The Tui Bei Tu sits inside a much older Chinese literary tradition called chenwei, prophetic apocryphal texts that were circulated alongside official Confucian classics. Chenwei texts claim to reveal hidden meanings inside the 5 classics, concealed messages from Confucius himself about the movement of heaven and the fate of dynasties. These texts flourished during the Han Dynasty and were repeatedly suppressed by later regimes as politically dangerous. The Tui Bei Tu inherited that entire tradition of forbidden wisdom. Now let's talk about what the text actually contains, because the structure itself is unusual and important to understand before we look at specific panels. Each of the 60 panels has 3 distinct layers. First, an illustrated image with symbolic figures. Second, a cryptic verse called the Chen prophecy. And third, a prose commentary that attempts to explain both. The illustrated image is typically symbolic rather than literal. A figure holding a particular object, celestial bodies in specific arrangements, animals in unusual combinations. The Chen verse is dense and compressed, using classical Chinese where a single character can carry multiple meanings simultaneously, built specifically to resist pinning down. The prose commentary layer is crucial. It is where later readers, interpreting the image and verse for their own historical moment, wrote in what they believed the panel meant. This layered structure means you're almost never reading a single author's original intent. You're reading centuries of accumulated interpretation piled on top of a symbolic image. With that structure in mind, let's walk through some of the most famous specific panels and be explicit each time about what the evidence actually supports. Panel 1 is associated with the founding of the Tang dynasty itself, the dynasty whose astronomers supposedly wrote the text in the first place. The image in this panel is conventionally interpreted to show the beginning of a great era, but the key question is whether this reading was made during or after the Tang dynasty's founding. Since the text is attributed to early Tang authors writing at the dynasty's height, a panel praising that same dynasty's founding would be, at best, contemporary self-congratulation, not prophecy. One of the most cited examples in later centuries involves a panel said to foretell the Empress Wu Zetian, China's only woman to rule as emperor in her own name. Wu Zetian ruled from 690 to 705 CE, declaring her own dynasty, the Zhou, briefly interrupting Tang rule in a move that shocked the Confucian establishment. The relevant Tui Bei Tu panel's image is said to show a female figure in a position of supreme authority, and the verse contains characters that can be read to reference a woman and the character for Zhou. Here is the critical methodological problem. Wu Zetian's reign began in 690 CE, and if the text was actually compiled before that date, this could be a genuine prior reference. But if even a single later editor updated the panel's verse or image after 690 CE, which cannot be ruled out given the broken chain of manuscript evidence, the reading collapses entirely. Classical Chinese's deliberate ambiguity compounds this problem significantly. The same four-character phrase can honestly be read to describe a woman rising to power or a male official taking a new title. A second frequently cited panel is associated with the fall of the Tang dynasty in 907 CE, when the warlord Zhu Wen forced the last Tang emperor's abdication. The panel attributed to this moment contains an image interpreted as showing a figure kneeling before another, with a verse whose characters have been read as referencing the surname Zhu and the act of usurpation. The name Zhu means vermilion or red in classical Chinese, and commentators have noted that the relevant character appears in the verse, but commentators writing after 907 CE in all surviving manuscripts. This is the central evidentiary problem with every single panel in this text. The surviving manuscripts all postdate the events they are said to predict. A text's first confirmed appearance in historical records is the earliest date we can use, and for the Tui Bei Tu, that earliest confirmed reference places it comfortably in the Song dynasty, not the Tang. That means for every panel associated with a Tang-era event, we have no proof the panel existed before that event, making the prediction unfalsifiable by any standard of historical evidence. Now let's turn to the suppression, because the banning of this text by successive dynasties is itself a documented historical phenomenon, even where the text's origins are not. The Song dynasty, ruling from 960 to 1279 CE, provides the first well-documented attempts to suppress and control the Tui Bei Tu. Song-era records show the government repeatedly attempted to collect and restrict private copies of prophetic texts, with the Tui Bei Tu specifically named in at least some official notices. The logic of suppression was consistent across dynasties. A text claiming to chart the fall of ruling houses was dangerous whether or not it was genuinely prophetic. If rebels could point to a 60-panel illustrated text and say, "Look, heaven itself has already decreed the end of this dynasty," that was a political weapon regardless of its accuracy. This is why the Song dynasty's most consequential act was not simply banning the text, it was reportedly scrambling the panel order. The tradition holds that a Song emperor ordered the 60 panels deliberately reordered so that no reader could identify which panel corresponded to which future era, destroying its usefulness as a political prophecy chart. The irony is that the scrambling, if it happened, backfired completely. It transformed the text from a specific sequential prophecy into an open-ended puzzle that could be applied to almost anything. An ordered prophecy text with fixed sequence is testable and can be discredited panel by panel. A scrambled puzzle text is permanently unverifiable, and paradoxically more durable. The scrambling story may itself be legendary rather than documented, but the factual result of having multiple competing panel orders in surviving manuscripts is not in dispute. Different surviving manuscript versions of the Tui Bei Tu have different panel sequences, different verse texts, different images, and different commentaries. They are not minor variations, but substantial divergences. Without a pre-Song era manuscript, one that predates the documented suppression and scrambling, it is impossible to reconstruct what the text originally looked like, if an original as such even exists. The Yuan dynasty, the Mongol-ruled empire from 1271 to 1368 CE, continued the tradition of suppressing this and similar prophetic texts. The Yuan rulers had particular reason to fear dynasty fall prophecy texts. They were foreign conquerors, and legitimacy anxiety was structurally built into their rule over a majority Han Chinese population. Prophetic texts circulating with claims that heaven had already decided who the next dynasty would be were, from a Yuan ruler's perspective, existential threats dressed in literary clothing. The Ming dynasty, 1368 to 1644 CE, brought its own layer of suppression and, ironically, its own wave of new Tui Bei Tu commentary. The Ming also saw the Tui Bei Tu pressed into service as a political tool from below. Rebel movements and reform factions alike cited it to legitimize their positions. Because the panel order was already scrambled and multiple versions circulated, different factions could cite different panels and claim completely opposite things, both said to be in the same text. The Qing dynasty, 1644 to 1912 CE, was, if anything, even more systematic in its censorship of prophetic texts, conducting multiple empire-wide literary inquisitions. The Qing Sikuquan Shu Project, one of the largest book collection enterprises in world history, also served as a sophisticated censorship operation, identifying and eliminating anti-Qing texts. Any text claiming to prophesy the fall of dynasties was precisely the kind of material the Qing literary inquisitions targeted. and the Tui Bei Tu's survival through this period is itself a remarkable fact. The text survived in part because it circulated outside official channels, copied in private households, passed between scholars, reproduced by printing houses in periods of looser enforcement. Each private copy introduced further variations. A character misread and recopied. A commentary merged into the verse. An image redrawn from memory after the original was lost or confiscated. The result is the textual situation that modern scholars actually face. Multiple recensions, none clearly primary, none traceable to an original, all potentially useful, and all potentially corrupted. Let's now look at one panel associated with the Mongol conquest, an event that clearly occurred centuries after the Tang, which would at least give us a theoretical window for genuine prior composition. One panel's image is described in commentaries as showing a figure from the north arriving to displace a central figure, which has been read as the Mongol conquest of the southern Song in 1279 CE. The critical fact here is that if a Song dynasty scholar knew about this panel, they might have been reading it as a commentary on events unfolding in their own time, not a prediction from the Tang. And if a Song commentator added the specific interpretation to an existing image after the Mongol conquest had begun, they were not reporting a prophecy. They were writing political history in retrospective symbolic language. A third important panel type involves the Ming dynasty's founding, the replacement of Mongol Yuan rule by the Chinese Han rebel leader, who would become the Hongwu emperor. The relevant panel in some versions of the Tui Bei Tu is interpreted to reference a man of humble origin rising from the south to rule all under heaven, which fits the Hongwu emperor's actual biography remarkably well. The catch, as always, the earliest manuscript versions that show this specific panel interpretation date to after the Hongwu emperor's reign, some significantly after. This does not mean the reading is wrong or that the text is a fraud. It means the evidence is insufficient to determine what the original panel said, and humility is the only intellectually defensible position. The same methodological discipline applies when we look at the most discussed modern application of the text, the fall of the Qing dynasty in 1912. Several panels in the Tui Bei Tu have been retroactively assigned to events of the late 19th and early 20th centuries: the Taiping Rebellion, the Sino-Japanese War, the Republican Revolution. These readings are almost all retroactive, made after the events by commentators assigning existing panels to events already known. This is not prophecy, it is pattern matching with unlimited degrees of freedom. When a text has 60 panels with cryptic symbolic images that can each be read multiple ways, and the ordering is scrambled, you can find evidence of almost any sequence of events in human history. This is not a cynical observation, it is a structural feature of the genre, and the chenwei tradition was aware of it. The ambiguity was a feature, not a defect. The chenwei tradition that produced texts like the Tui Bei Tu was built on a cosmological model where heaven communicated through symbols, anomalies, and classical texts, not literal announcements. Within that cosmological model, a skilled reader who could decode heaven's signs was not predicting the future so much as reading a hidden text that already existed in the cosmic order. This framing is why the Tui Bei Tu's claimed authors, court astronomers, make cultural sense. Astronomers in Tang, China were precisely the officials responsible for reading heaven's messages and reporting them to the emperor. Li Chunfeng, one of the two named authors, is historically verified to have worked on astronomical and mathematical projects for the Tang court. The Zhuigu Xuanjing and parts of the Bingfa Baiwen are among documented works. His real documented work makes his name credible as an anchor for attribution, which is exactly why a later author seeking authority for a prophetic text might have chosen to attach his name to it. This was a common practice in pre-modern Chinese literary culture. Authoritative attribution to famous historical figures was how texts gained legitimacy, not fraud in the modern sense, but a different relationship to authorship entirely. Yuan Tiangang, the second named author, is similarly attested in Tang biographical sources. His physiognomy readings of several Tang officials are recorded in the Ju Tang Shu, the Old Book of Tang. Together, their names gave the Tui Bei Tu exactly the kind of official, expert, court-connected authority that made suppressing it uncomfortable. These were not fringe mystics, but documented imperial officials. To ban the Tui Bei Tu was to ban the work of your own court's astronomers, which implied either that the imperial court's scientists were dangerous, or that the text was genuine and needed suppression precisely because it was true. This rhetorical trap helps explain why suppression efforts never succeeded fully. The text had built-in political immunity from the very prestige of its claimed authors. Now let's look at what happens when we try to use the Tui Bei Tu the way its most serious modern proponents want to use it, as a genuine predictive document about the future. Because the panel order is scrambled and disputed, any claim that this panel refers to event X requires first arguing that this particular recension has the right panel ordering, which no one can prove. Second, the verse's ambiguity means any reading is a translation choice, not a transparent decoding, and different translators of the same four-character phrase have reached completely different conclusions. Third, the imagery is symbolic, and symbolic images, like inkblot tests, are principally diagnostic of the interpreter's assumptions rather than the image's content. These three problems together, disputed ordering, linguistic ambiguity, symbolic imagery, mean that Tui Bei Tu cannot function as a testable predictive document by any standard of evidence. What it can function as, and what it is genuinely remarkable as, is a historical artifact of how Chinese political culture used symbolic language to process dynastic change. The text tells us something profound, that for over a millennium, ordinary educated Chinese people felt the need to imagine that history had a shape, that the rise and fall of dynasties was not random chaos, but a legible pattern. The Tui Bei Tu offered not prediction, but orientation, a way of asking, where are we in the cosmic cycle? And finding enough ambiguity to answer, we are at a turning point, which is always emotionally true. Dynasties always fall eventually. Any text that predicts a dynasty will fall is eventually correct. The question is only whether the timing and mechanism were genuinely specified beforehand. A final panel worth examining specifically, the one most frequently discussed in contemporary online Tui Bei Tu culture, panel 59 or 60 in most modern recensions, claim to refer to events of the present or near future. This panel, whichever panel number it occupies in a given recension, tends to feature imagery read as references to an era of great technological change or a final reckoning between great powers. These readings are made from the same scrambled, multiply recension, post-Tang surviving manuscripts as all the others. Nothing about the textual situation is any different for the final panels than for the first. The fact that a panel feels more contemporary or urgent to a reader in 2024 tells us something about that reader's moment in history, not about the 7th century text's foresight. Every generation since the Song dynasty has found its own era vividly described in the Tui Bei Tu, which is exactly what you would expect from a symbolically rich, deliberately ambiguous, unsorted set of 60 illustrated panels. And each generation's rulers found themselves in the uncomfortable position of needing to suppress the text without implying that they feared what it said about their own eventual fall. There is a particular poignancy to the Qing dynasty's suppression efforts, because by the time they were most vigorously banning the text in the 18th century, the text had already been in circulation for 600 or 700 years. By then, the text existed in printed form across dozens of regional printings. Confiscating manuscripts was one thing, but stopping woodblock printed copies was a categorically different and far larger challenge. The 20th century brought new dimensions to the text's story. The fall of the Qing in 1912, the Republican era, and eventually the rise of the People's Republic, all provided fresh interpretive material. The People's Republic of China has largely treated the Tui Bei Tu as superstition rather than political threat, which represents a significant shift from 4 dynasties of serious imperial anxiety about the same text. Yet the text continued to circulate with prophetic intent in diaspora Chinese communities, in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and across Southeast Asia, where the ban's authority did not extend. This diaspora circulation kept alive interpretive traditions that were being discouraged on the mainland, and when digital culture arrived, those traditions found a vastly wider audience. Online Tui Bei Tu communities today number in the hundreds of thousands of followers, particularly on Chinese social media platforms. The text has more active readers now than at any point in its history. Most of these readers are not scholars. They are people seeking a framework to understand a world that feels unpredictable, which is exactly the same need that drove the text's original creation and circulation. The need to read history as a legible pattern with a knowable future is not uniquely Chinese, but the Tui Bei Tu is one of the most elaborately constructed and culturally durable expressions of that need. Let's step back now and assess the full picture. What can we say with confidence? What is genuinely unknown, and what should any honest account of the Tui Bei Tu conclude? What is confirmed? Chunfeng and Yuan Tiangang were real Tang court officials. A text called the Tui Bei Tu was known to the Song court and was subject to collection efforts. Multiple versions of the text survive. What is confirmed further, the text was suppressed by Song, Yuan, Ming, and Qing dynasty governments. The text exists in multiple divergent recensions with no clear ear text traceable before the Song period. What is genuinely unknown? Whether Chunfeng and Yuan Tiangang composed the original text, whether any original text composed in the Tang period survives in any current recension, and what the original panel order was. What any honest account must conclude, no panel in the Tui Bei Tu can be evaluated as a confirmed prophecy because we cannot establish that any surviving panel text predates the event it supposedly describes. This is not a conclusion that the text is worthless. It is a conclusion about the specific claim that the text contains verified prior knowledge of future events, which is a different and much narrower question. As a historical artifact, the text is extraordinary. It shows us how Chinese political culture encoded anxieties about dynastic legitimacy in symbolic imagery and verse across more than 1,000 years of continuous readership. It shows us something important about how suppression works and how it often backfires. Every dynasty that tried to erase the Tui Bei Tu succeeded only in advertising how seriously they feared it. It shows us the power of ambiguity as a survival strategy. A text that can mean many things to many readers is far harder to kill than one with a single fixed interpretation. And it shows us something universal. The desire to believe that history has a pattern, that the suffering of dynastic collapse has a meaning, that somewhere in the cosmic order our present moment is already accounted for. The Tui Bei Tu does not tell us the future. What it tells us, more honestly, is something about the past and the enduring human need to make that future legible. For the scholars who have spent careers trying to establish a reliable text of the Tui Bei Tu, the scrambled ordering is not just a political curiosity, it is the central editorial problem of their field. The major modern recensions differ primarily on panel 38 through panel 45, a section where different manuscript families are completely irreconcilable in both image and verse content. Some scholars have argued that the divergence in this section suggests two completely different source texts were at some point merged, meaning what we call the Tui Bei Tu may be a composite from the beginning. A composite text assembled from multiple sources attributed to two famous historical names with deliberate ambiguity built into every element. This is the most likely historical profile of what the Tui Bei Tu actually is. This would make it less a work of individual authorship and more a cultural accumulation. A text that grew as each generation added to it, attributed backward to famous ancient sources as was common practice. This is, paradoxically, more interesting than if two individual authors had simply sat down in 650 CE and written 60 prophecies. It means the text is a 1,000-year collaborative conversation about power, legitimacy, and fate. Read that way. The Tui Bei Tu becomes not a document about the future, but a document about each contributing era's fears, aspirations, and understanding of where history was going. That is a legitimate and rich way to read any prophetic text. Not as a channel to the future, but as a mirror of its own era's concerns dressed in timeless symbolic language. And it is a method the Chinese literary tradition itself recognized and discussed, the idea that prophecy speaks more about the prophet's moment than the prophet's future. What is hardest to maintain and what the Tui Bei Tu's long suppression history shows most clearly is the distinction between the text as cultural artifact and the text as active political weapon. When the Song Emperor allegedly scrambled the panels, he was trying to kill the text as a political weapon while, inadvertently or not, preserving it as a cultural artifact. Each dynasty that banned it achieved the same result, a text that everyone knew was banned, which everyone therefore knew must contain something powerful, which everyone therefore sought out more urgently. The Tui Bei Tu's survival across 4 dynasties of active suppression is, in its own way, a kind of prophecy fulfilled. The text predicted it would endure by being exactly the kind of text that endures. There is a final methodological point worth making explicitly, one that applies to the Tui Bei Tu, but also to every other prophetic text in every culture: the problem of retrofitting. Retrofitting is the process of selecting from a large set of ambiguous statements exactly those that can be made to match a known event, while ignoring the equally ambiguous statements that match nothing. With 60 symbolically rich panels, each with multiple possible readings, the number of past events in Chinese history that some panel could be made to match approaches the total number of significant past events. This is not a defect of the Tui Bei Tu specifically. It is a structural property of any sufficiently large set of ambiguous symbolic statements, and it is why prior commitment to a specific reading before the event is the only meaningful test. No version of the Tui Bei Tu has ever been used in that way. No interpreter has made a specific, falsifiable, sealed before the event prediction from a specific panel and been subsequently verified. That fact alone does not prove the text is fraudulent. It proves only that it has not yet functioned as a verified predictive system. Those are two different statements. The honest answer, which is a harder sell than either excited prophecy affirmation or gleeful debunking, is that the Tui Bei Tu is a genuinely remarkable object that we cannot evaluate the way we evaluate a dated document. It was created in a cultural context where the boundary between astronomy, prophecy, political theory, and literary art was deliberately blurred, and it needs to be read in that context, not extracted from it. The Tang court astronomers, who may or may not have composed it, were not con artists running a scam. They were serious intellectuals working within a cosmological model that took heaven's communication with humanity entirely seriously. And the successive emperors who banned the text were not simply authoritarian censors with nothing better to do. They were rulers for whom the political consequences of a circulating dynasty fall prophecy were genuinely and concretely dangerous. The story of the Tui Bei Tu is ultimately a story about what texts mean and who gets to decide, a tension that has not been resolved in the 14th century since it was first attributed to those two Tang astronomers. Every culture that has had a prophetic tradition has also had a suppression tradition. The two are inseparable because prophecy and political authority are necessarily in competition over who knows the future. In that larger context, the Tui Bei Tu is not an anomaly. It is a particularly well-documented, particularly durable, and particularly examined example of an entirely universal cultural dynamic. What sets the Tui Bei Tu apart is the quality of its imagery, the complexity of its structural layering, the scale of its suppression history, and the degree to which it has remained an active cultural conversation. That active conversation, the fact that millions of people still read and debate this text's meaning in 2024, is itself historical evidence of the text's power, even if it is not evidence of the text's prophetic accuracy. The last thing to address is perhaps the most honest. If you read the Tui Bei Tu today and find it compelling, what are you actually experiencing? You are experiencing the pleasure of pattern recognition, one of the most fundamental and deeply satisfying cognitive experiences available to a human mind. You are also experiencing the comfort of believing that history has a shape, that there is a pattern in the chaos of dynasties and wars and social change that can be read and understood. And you are experiencing something the Song Dynasty readers felt, the Ming Dynasty readers felt, and the Tang Dynasty court astronomers, whoever they were, apparently felt strongly enough to build a 60-panel illustrated system to express. The pushback diagram pushes back against time itself, against the terrifying openness of the future, and finds in the past's symbolic record something that feels like an answer. Whether the answer is real, whether the pattern is genuine or imposed, whether the astronomers were prophets or poets, these are questions the text has refused to answer clearly for 14 centuries, and that refusal is the engine of its survival. The text survives. 4 dynasties that tried to suppress it do not. And the debate about what it means and whether it works is as alive today as it was when the first Song emperor reportedly scrambled its pages. What we can say with full confidence is that the Tui Bei Tu is a genuine piece of Chinese intellectual and political history. Whatever its prophetic status, its historical importance is not in doubt. It is a document of how a civilization thought about fate, power, and the shape of history, written in a language of symbols, revised across centuries, and preserved against the explicit will of 4 successive governments. The Chinese tradition of chenwei apocrypha produced many texts like this, most now lost. The Tui Bei Tu's distinction is that it survived with enough volume and variety of manuscript tradition to be studied seriously. The scholars who established its Song-era textual baseline, who painstakingly compared recensions, who resisted both the temptation to affirm and the temptation to dismiss, these are the people who made this story tellable. If this text has any power, it is not the power to tell you the future. It is the power to show you how profoundly a civilization can encode its deepest anxieties in 60 illustrated pages. 60 panels, 4 banning dynasties, multiple scrambled versions, 0 confirmed prior predictions, and 1,400 years of readers who found it impossible to stop looking. The text does not tell us what is coming. It tells us what we have always feared is coming, dressed in the language of a civilization that built its entire cosmological system around the idea that heaven speaks and that someone somewhere knows how to listen. The pushback diagram pushed back and kept pushing through 1,000 years of bans and burnings and scrambled pages and lost manuscripts. And it is still pushing back today, still generating new interpretations, new commentaries, new arguments, new readers who find in its 60 symbolic panels something they could not quite find anywhere else. That is the pushback diagram, not a proof of prophecy, not a fraud, but one of the most durable symbolic conversations in Chinese intellectual history, and one that the evidence, honestly assessed, leaves beautifully unresolved. What history can tell us, it has told us. What the text cannot prove, it has never proven. And what it keeps doing, despite everything, is making people ask the question. The question is, does heaven speak, and if so, in what language? The Tui Bei Tu answered, in images, in verse, in symbols that are just ambiguous enough to survive every attempt to kill them. That answer is neither confirmation nor denial. It is the most interesting kind of historical object, one that holds its secret just tightly enough to keep you reaching. 14 centuries of reaching, banning, scrambling, copying, reading, and debating, and the scroll is still here, still generating conversation, still defying simple answers. The astronomers who may have built this thing were, at minimum, extraordinary craftsmen of ambiguity, and at maximum, something that 14 centuries of banning emperors apparently could not quite categorize. The text is not proof of prophecy. It is proof that the desire to see the future is one of the most unkillable things in human history, and that those who try to bury that desire only make it more compelling. The pushback diagram pushed back, and it is still pushing. For 14 centuries, 4 empires tried to bury 60 illustrated pages and failed every single time. Subscribe to History Retold for the forbidden texts, suppressed histories, and the scholars who refuse to let them disappear.